Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? I'll call this meeting to order. It is the Assembly Legislative Committee. Today is Thursday, May 8th. We are noticed from 11:50 a.m. to 12:50 p.m. I'm here in City Hall 155. We'll go around and do introductions and then we'll move into our agenda. So starting with Mr. Martinez.
George Martinez.
Yoro Silvers.
Scott Myers.
Keith McCormick.
Aaron Baldwin Day.
Zach Johnson.
Anna Brawley. And I don't know if we have any members on the phone, not at this time. I'll keep an eye out. And then we are also joined by members of Legislative Services, Assembly Council, as well as one of our presenters from Anchorage School District. And we will also expect sometime soon our lobbyist on the phone. So let's go ahead and move through our agenda. Let's see, don't think we have anything under unfinished business. That's just general updates on federal and state legislation and policy. We'll come back to if folks want to talk about specific priorities, and otherwise we will move into our updates. So since we don't have our state lobbyist on the phone yet, I'm going to turn first to, I'm going to reorder the agenda a little bit. We'll take up education funding, and then hopefully our lobbyist will be on in a little bit, and then we'll come back with some other updates on legislative bills. As well as the committee plan. So with that, I will turn to Mr. Ratliff, who's here from the school district to give us an update on where things are at with state education funding.
Great, thank you. For the record, I'm Andy Ratliff. I'm the CFO for the school district. I wanted to go through, this is a presentation that we gave to our school board on Tuesday afternoon about one, it does include kind of a status update on the legislation, but then two, it kind of goes into some projected revenue that the schools made based on that assumed revenue. Let's see. So really just go through our assumptions for projecting the revenue in the board memo 153 that passed on Tuesday night. The finance committee, this was a school board action, came from the school board finance committee, their recommended additions, and then want to briefly talk about the reductions that are still in place in our budget, even with those add backs, and then kind of the risks and benefits of projecting this revenue when we don't necessarily have it in hand yet, and then the 26-27 outlook. So really the basis the board used for proposing a budget revision, and with context, they approved a $560 BSA increase prospectively. Nothing's actually been passed by the state yet. HB 57 was passed by both the House and Senate with a 48 out of 60 majority in support. That's currently waiting the governor's signature. That included a $700 BSA increase for about $50 million, a 10% transportation increase, and then some CTE multipliers and proficiency incentives contingent upon SB 113 passing, which was the digital sales tax. Is there any questions?
I don't see any.
Also, for the basis they used for the 560 amount, that was the BSA that was included in the governor's proposed bill. That was just the BSA increase. There was some other things in there for correspondence and charter schools and things like that. So they're just using the 560, the base BSA that was in there. So really, in this year, we got a $680 BSA equivalent. So the thought is being, if they do cut education, it shouldn't be much less than what they gave us this year. But again, this is a calculated risk to help retain our staff. We have our layoff notices that would have been scheduled to go out either May 15th for tenured or last day of school for non-tenured. So really, it's trying to get ahead of those layoff notices going out and be able to place folks in these buildings and taking that risk to be able to do so. However, assuredly that money may come, I guess. So, but we'll go over kind of what those risks look like and what happens in the event that money doesn't come through. So what they added back was we had originally proposed a +4.
Sorry, question from Member Baldwin Day.
Yes, before we move on. So I just want to be sure that I have the financial picture correct. So HB 57 would be a $700 BSA increase over the 560 that's in the governor's budget, or that would be the total of the BSA?
That would be the total. So of the 5, we could add another 140 back if that actually passes.
Thank you.
I think it'd be around $10 million or so. But what we'd add back would be originally we had proposed a +4 PTR increase. That's the pupil teacher ratio. We would still have an increase, but it'd only be +1 by adding this stuff back. So add back a plus or a -3 essentially from where our budget was. We'd have holdback teachers coming back, and those are just kind of unassigned teachers that we'd go place into buildings based on kind of class size bubbles or scheduling conflicts at secondary schools, kind of wherever we need them, where we see those holes. It would add back the Ignite program. Some funding would go to charter schools based on the statutory requirements. And then the cuts to elementary immersion teachers, some of the cuts to special education. And then it would add back the paraprofessionals that are kind of tied to these kindergarten classrooms, as well as summer schools, some allotment increase for correspondence, and then the battle of the books. Those are the big items to be added back on instructional. And then we added back some other things in kind of instructional support, the librarians, nurses, sports, some in teaching and learning. These are reading specialists that would be assigned to schools, and then some library assistants, counselors. And then the last one would be 2.5 new positions for counselors to invest in the board's goals of getting at least a half-time counselor at all elementary schools. So those are kind of the big chunks of things the school board added back under this amendment or this proposal. If there's any questions on that.
Sorry, one from Baldwin Day, go ahead.
Thank you. So this looks like almost 40 million in revisions. If there's but there's only 10 million that we're thinking is going to come back from the legislature over and above what's already been budgeted.
So yeah, it would be 10 billion above this 40 million.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So yeah, we could add another 10 million back into it if we get it.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
So the things that are still in place as far as reductions, and there's about 23 million or so in total reductions that'll be in place under this plan. We'd still have the +1 PTR, that's 57 teachers. The enrollment-based teachers, that's just, doesn't really change the metric, but as we've lost students over the last, 10, 15, 20 years now, it's, whenever we lose those, we don't need the same number of teachers. We'd increase the holdback teachers. We'd still have like principals, librarians, nurses, some clerical and elementary. That's due to school closures. So as we close Naka Valley and Lake Hood elementary schools, the staffing associated with those goes down. That's kind of the purpose for closing, is be able to reduce some of those positions and costs. The other one was like you'll see a big chunk out of there for the Family Partnership Correspondence School. They lost a lot of students too. So it's really just getting the allotment amounts down to meet the needs of the students. So the allotment wouldn't change, but the amount they need to support those students is less because they have fewer students. We still reduced about 1.2 million out of special services. By and large, the big chunks of that are elementary special education, where they've consolidated some programs for the resource classrooms. They'll still be able to meet IEPs and make all the federal requirements, but that's really the biggest chunk of that. And then some positions at Whaley, as we have fewer students at Whaley now as well, so we're able to reduce some of those staff. Didn't make any real changes to administration, still including all those cuts here, about 30 positions, about $7.5 million. The biggest line item on there is the last one, the kind of added duty services, supplies, equipment. A lot of this is major maintenance funds that goes towards just keeping our buildings functional. Boiler goes out, that's how we pay for it. So we cut that. We cut some IT equipment out of there that we need to refresh, like student devices and curriculum. So really, we just maintained all the same admin cuts that were there before. We just added instructional and instructional support items back into the budget. So the risk of this is if we get some amount less than the 560 BSA, if something in the legislature goes south, we don't get anything. That's $40 million that we don't have next year. How we would make that up would include hiring freezes, reductions in discretionary funding at all the schools and departments, and then we'd probably end up having to liquidate a lot of our assigned fund balances that we keep in reserves, and that could be encumbrances for projects, self-insurance, really anything we kind of have out there that we have money set aside for would have to be liquidated so you don't have a negative variance in your fund balance. The real benefit of this is allowing placement of staff prior to the end of school, and we can retain a lot of our teachers. Whenever we did pink slip folks, I think it was probably back in like 2017 or 18 was the last time we actually did this. About a third of those didn't come back to the profession. So whenever you do that, you lose so many people because of the uncertainty of their jobs. But really where we're at in our process here for displacements, the process is going to be, we met with all our principals yesterday. They're really going to, so you guys have probably heard a lot about the displacements as well. But really the process is going to be, we're going to undisplace people and reset them back to kind of where they were in March and then go through the process again. So almost just call it a mulligan, resetting it and then going through the process to make sure those staff get placed back hopefully at their home school. And then there will be still probably 20 or 30 staff that are going to be displaced and have to move. But certainly not the hundreds that we were originally projecting. That's the real benefit of this, is to be able to help retain some of our highly qualified educators. So the outlook, here's where it's.
Yep, question from Ms. Baldwin Day.
Yes, thank you. I feel a little badly actually being like, I promise I'm not grilling you. So those 20 to 30 staff that will be displaced, are those certified teachers that we're talking about at that point?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And it's generally because we're still increasing the PTR and that enrollment decline. There's just less staff allocated to each building. But it's really going to be dependent on how many people retired from each or left each school. So our kind of really rough outlook to 26, 27. This is kind of the simple math on what that deficit's going to look like based on the current plan. The first line, that's assuming the $560 BSA is permanent. That would generate about $585 million, and then our costs are going to be about $635 million or so, using $50 million in fund balance to make up the difference. This does draw our fund balance down to maybe $6 or $7 million in total for our unassigned balance that's really truly spendable in the event of emergencies. So we're not going to have, after next year, we really wouldn't have anything else to help kind of soften those deficits. Assuming a 3% cost increase for labor, utilities, insurance, whatever else, about $19 million gets your ongoing expenditures to about $654 million. And then the delayed purchases in 26, we can't not budget for these major maintenance projects, equipment replacement, curriculum in perpetuity. We just can't not have those. So the amount of ongoing revenue, the $585 million minus those costs, is about $75 million deficit. There's a lot of things that are going to affect this, including we have a lot of unsettled labor contracts, our biggest one being our educators. That's our most expensive contract, of course. And that's not settled, so that could have a fairly large impact on what that deficit is. Any sort of enrollment variances, medical costs, tariffs, utility rate changes. There's a lot of things that could go in and change this estimate. This is really early to be making one, but it just to kind of give folks a mind's eye view of whatever's in the legislature now is not going to solve this problem. So really, that's kind of where we're sitting, about a estimated $70 to $80 million deficit to see for FY27 on top of the $23 million in cuts that we've already made this year. So the outlook's not very optimistic at this point. So with that, open it up to questions and comments.
Yeah, thank you. Questions from members? Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. So for 26, you're talking about spending roughly around $49 million from the fund balance, which would take it down close to functionally zero. And then, I understand ASD is in a really horrible position right now. And frankly, I think that's shameful. But it's where we're at, right? So where you're talking about 27, if we don't see the legislature raise the BSA, then $74 million deficit, it feels like we're really dropping off a cliff at this point. Is there contemplation of, rather than the $634 million in expenditures for FY26 that, eats up almost all that fund balance, are you contemplating keeping more in reserve to kind of even out that curve a little bit?
Yeah, we would. I think, the board's direction, the first amendment that they made at $1,000 BSA, that added all the money back too. So if you're going to add back all the new state money and still spend that $50 million in fund balance, you're still going to have that same $70 to $80 million deficit. So between 560 and 1,000, based on what the board's put out, then both proposals had them spending it all. But yeah, there has been some talk about what you could potentially save to offset future deficits, but we're still cutting quite a bit of money out of this budget. So I don't know. I don't have a great answer for that, but that's something we did for this year when we got the 680 equivalent. We didn't spend all of it. We put some of it back in our savings, or we spent less of our savings, I should say, because this year we're still planning on spending like 37 million of our savings. But yeah, so it's just kind of the level of services that the board wants to see. I think at the 560, there wouldn't be much discussion, or at this point it's passed, so no discussion about putting it back into savings. But if you got like a 700, another 10 million, would they want to do that? That'd be up to the board. But then you still have a $65 million problem instead of 75 million.
Yeah, okay. Disconcerting, but thank you.
I'm concerned as well. All this makes me kind of nervous. So
Yeah, I think we all feel that. Other questions? Okay, I actually have a couple, and maybe sometimes that sparks other questions. One is just to be clear about the timing. And I should also say, for new members, if you're not aware, we do a quarterly joint meeting with the school board. So our next one is on, I believe, June 7th. And so I imagine this will be a topic of discussion, and hopefully things will get resolved by that point. So also just to say, this is not our last opportunity to understand. But in terms of timing, so it sounds like the board adopted this new budget, and then session is ending essentially in a couple weeks. So do you, I guess at this point, how does this work in terms of the legislative action? I know, just trying to understand kind of, is there a risk in terms of timing or sequencing of these things right now?
yeah, I mean, the biggest risk for us is really once it gets past that May retention date, that once we have all those folks on contract, we have to pay them the next year. Really what we're looking at is for timing, waiting for the governor to either veto or sign or let it lapse into law. The second bite of the apple they have is with the actual operating budget. So they could potentially sign HB 57 and have that $700 BSA increase. And then in the operating budget line item, veto out a portion of that to just kind of short fund it essentially. And we won't know that until, I doubt that budget's going to be done until, the last day of session, frankly. So if they get pulled in a special session, then it's going to go on longer. And then how long it takes them to get back into in there to try to override vetoes. So I don't have a really good answer on the timeline, but it's there's kind of a lot of moving things, and they always do stuff last minute.
Okay. And then second question, I know there's been a lot of discussion about policy. We haven't really tracked in detail the policy bills. One example is the rules around cell phones. So just wondering at this point, does ASD have any concerns of, what's in HB 57, or how does that impact the district in a negative way or in any way?
I don't believe so for the cell phones. I'm not really, I guess, as close to that piece of policy. But, where the school board's looking at putting their own cell phone policies in as well. So that's, we know it's an issue, and try to limit the use of cell phones in schools. Try to do some pilot projects on it as well. So that's kind of the biggest one. The other pieces of policy, there was some for like open enrollment, which we already do as a district. The one thing kind of difference between the governor's proposal and I think what's in HB 57 is the mechanism in which students are assigned to those schools. Like it would be, whether it's a lottery process, or in the governor's proposal, I believe it was kind of a first come, first serve approach. So there's a little bit of differences in those, but either way, we still do that open enrollment component where if a school can take the student, they should take them.
Thank you. And then last question that I have anyway is school bond debt reimbursement. So I know that's been a discussion. I know we'll hear an update from the mayor's office. They wrote or have been speaking in favor of, retaining that school bond debt reimbursement. So I know it's something that we care about, but just wondering the state of that right now and what the financial impact may be.
Yeah, so right now it's set for all newly approved bonds is set to expire at the end of this fiscal year. So July, any new propositions passed after July 25 will be subject to like a 50% bond debt reimbursement. I know there's a bill out there to extend that to 27 at this point. And then there has been some discussion of short funding what's already been approved for those bonds prior to 2015. So that number is getting smaller, but we still have several $1 million of costs that are paid by the state on those old bonds. But yeah, I don't know where they're going to end up with it, but they have discussed shorting that account as well.
Yeah, and I'll just note, that's a topic we can come back to, but essentially, school bond debt reimbursement is reimbursing communities for projects that we've put forward, like our school bonds. And so if we do not get those funds, property taxes go up. Or if we do get more funding from the state, which has historically been the case, then property taxes can essentially go down or be held flat on that item.
Yeah, and I think the way that we've addressed that, when it happened in the past, I think it started happening like 2017 or 18. We had like, it would be like kind of a year in arrears where, okay, now we figure out how much they shorted us, then we go back and put that on our next tax request.
Okay, Mr. Johnson.
Around the possible decision to short fund school bond debt reimbursement, that's already essentially been authorized. Is there any question about whether or not that would be legally correct? And I understand we're not lawyers, but are people raising concerns?
It is subject to appropriation. That's put in all the bond propositions. It's put in all the state statutes. So there wasn't any legal challenges raised when they did it before. I can't imagine they'd actually do it this time, but I'm not a lawyer either. So
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Thanks.
Any other questions? Ms. Baldwin Day.
Has there been any conversation about potentially advocating for a change to state statute as far as what municipalities can contribute to education?
yep, and I believe that's going to come up as it's supposed to be pretty soon. The deed is making a recommendation to the state board that would further limit the contributions we currently get. Because right now we get money for transportation outside of the state cap for the local contribution. So that there's a state cap, how much you can take in local. And we've been taking transportation funding outside of that state cap. But I believe the deed's proposal to the state board is going to narrow how we define that. So like transportation would be included in that overall state cap that has currently been excluded. So they're trying to further limit it versus kind of relax the regulations and let municipalities contribute more.
Are there any advocates in the legislature at this point for further relaxing the state cap?
Yes, there are. I believe Andy Story is working on a bill to define it in statute versus AARs, where I believe it currently lives. And that would like exclude certain things: transportation, community services, sports. I think even pre-K. Pre-K is getting a little bit hairy because they're funding half of it, or a half-time ADM for the pre-K students. But that would be another thing we get from the city because we get taxes to pay for pre-K schools as well, or classrooms. So I don't know what deed would actually come back on that part of it, but on the transportation, they've been pretty explicit that they want to include that in the cap.
Okay.
And that would go into effect in 27, I believe, is what their intent. But
And just for clarity, AAR, is that regulations?
yeah.
Okay, any other questions from members? Okay, I don't see any. Well, we will certainly stay tuned of what happens. I know we have taken it as a high priority to support state education funding and really advocate to the state. So we'll see what happens, and we will discuss this further at the joint meeting on June 7th. So thank you for being here. Okay, I will check one more time. Is our lobbyist on the phone? Okay, yeah, I thought not. I know it's busy the last days of session. So we'll jump back in and have her present if she shows up, but otherwise we'll keep moving. In terms of update on active legislative bills, of course, the budget is a big one. I will not be the one to give detailed updates on any of these. But I will actually turn to, so normally Nolan Clouda from the mayor's office also participates in these meetings. He is out of office today. He provided a written update, so I've asked our staff, Ms. Veneklassen, to give those updates. And then I will also note there are two letters of support that the mayor's office wrote, or that the mayor wrote. We are not going to discuss those in detail, but for those who are interested, they are available online, and we'll cover the gist of those. So I will turn it to Ms. Veneklassen.
Thank you. Through the chair, this Nolan, as the chair said, is out. So here is his update from the administration on government affairs. We're closely monitoring 3 important items that were not in the Senate version of the budget. The mayor's been making calls to key legislators on community assistance, which is worth $3 to $4 million to the MOA budget. School bond debt reimbursement. If existing communities were funded, that would be worth $14 million. If zeroed out, taxpayers pick up this amount, which comes to roughly $30 per 100,000 assessed value. And thirdly, behavioral health funding of $13.75 million to supplement Medicaid rates for behavioral health. The mayor, as the chair noted, the mayor recently provided letters of support for the maintenance of behavioral health funds and for HB 138, which is the 988 crisis behavioral health bill. They're monitoring HB 136, which is Representative Kopp's railroad utility corridor bill that potentially has impacts to Fish Creek Trail development. It's scheduled for a hearing today. And then lastly, the federal lobbying RFP for the Muni closed on April 23rd, and they are in the evaluation phase, so no announcements yet.
Okay, thank you. And normally I would say, do folks have questions? But of course, Nolan is not here. But I will also highly recommend, if you're interested, not even in the purview of this committee, but if you're interested in what the state is doing, or sorry, what the Muni is doing in terms of advocacy to the state, please do connect with Mr. Clouda. He is the main point of contact and closely following along with departments, depending on the issue. Myself and Mr. Johnson are also tracking, but we are not the folks who are taking lead on that. So feel free to reach out. I know Nolan would be happy to speak, or if you have a specific bill that you'd like to talk about. So with that, we'll move on and just note, we have our tracking list. So this is the piece of paper here. It's a long list, but we are not actively tracking all of these things here. These are items that have been identified. So the first page is the budget. The rest of them are, you'll see noted by topic area and bill number with an update where they're at. So thank you again to our legislative services staff for staying on top of that. And we've got, I'll just briefly say, we've got things that we've either taken a position on or are very closely related to our issues. So for example, I think HB 13, the one around tax exemptions, was mentioned. And there's some other ones that would affect the municipality. So anyway, so we're tracking those. And then also on this list in the separate category are things that may connect with us or may be of interest based on our legislative priorities that we adopted at the end of last year. But they're not necessarily things that we have taken a position on or are really active on unless, for example, there's an amendment that very negatively impacts the municipality where we may want to respond. But also I will turn to Ms. Ross briefly, because I know you've been tracking Senate Bill 47, if you want to give the good news there.
Also, just real quick on the tracker that you're looking at, it's about a week old. So if you want an updated version, just let me know, because the budget bills have obviously had some movement, and then HB 57 on education funding isn't updated on your tracker.
SB 47, is that one of them?
Yeah, the two-getch access.
Access bill. Yeah, it has passed. It started in the Senate, passed quickly through there, it just passed the House. Representatives Bloom, Holland, and Josephson have also signed on, and so it's on its way to the governor's desk. So hopefully that one can get done this session, and we can count that as a win, because that was one of our priorities. And we feel that that one is critical for being able to pass CASA bonds. The city isn't allowed to use bond money for property that we don't control. So that should help CRASA. And I think there's also some thoughts that it could help with wildfire prevention if we had arrangements with the state to do some more stuff on the land.
Yeah, thank you. And that was one I know Mr. Falsey in the mayor's office or the chief administrative officer has been closely tracking. It does definitely have positive implications for folks on the hillside and anybody who wants to access Chugach Park. So again, I would encourage following up with Nolan or Mr. Falsey, Mr. Cloud or Mr. Falsey to learn more about that. But that's great news. And also, of course, this is the first year of a 2-year legislative session. So when we were in this room this time last year, there was a lot of bills passing or folks giving up that they weren't going to pass by the end of that time. But of course, anything that was introduced this year will still be in play for next year. So I think what we're seeing is this list is not going to go away, but we likely won't see action on a lot of things other than the budget, to Mr. Ratleff's point that they'll probably do it right at the last day. Ms. Ross, did you have something to add? Okay, fair enough, offline. Okay, and then I'll also ask, we've made space in this committee if there are specific either bills or issues or priorities that members would like to bring up, whether it's a district priority, a bill you're tracking. So also see if there's any thoughts there at the moment. And no worries if there's not. Okay, I'm not seeing any right now. So I think we've moved through most of our business. I think, as I said, normally we would have our state lobbyist call in, but I know she's probably in meetings or running around figuring out what's going on. So we'll just note the budget is, of course, still in process. We've seen a lot of information in the news. We don't know exactly where it'll shake out. I know Mayor's office is tracking closely. We are keeping an eye on the priorities we have, like community assistance, and otherwise staying within the bounds of our legislative program. So I think the last thing we'll do just very briefly today is kind of share where this committee's been and then some thoughts about where it's going and just an open invitation to continue to be involved. So this committee has one core function, and of course this is mostly useful for new members, but helpful to remind everybody. The main core function of this committee is to work with the mayor's office to develop the legislative program, which is our formal, these are the things that we want to see from Juneau that we do every year. And so it's basically a booklet. It is developed in the fall, and then we in code actually have to adopt it by, I think, December 10th. There's a specific deadline for it. And it's really a way that we identify our big picture priorities. Now that we have bill numbers, we can mention specific bills or specific policies in that legislative program. And we ask each pair of folks from each district to identify district priorities. So whether it's a road project or a park project or things like that, that is important to your area. And so that process will kick off later this year. We have our 2025 legislative program in place. You can get a copy if you haven't already from our staff. It's a really nice little booklet. And that will be updated next year, probably not from scratch, but really saying, here's still our priorities, here's updates, and maybe emerging issues. Like the last couple of years, we had the energy issues really rise to the fore. So that has come in as a priority that wasn't maybe there a couple of years ago. So all that to say, one of the functions of this committee is to vet that process, have members come to the table with ideas, working with the mayor's office, and then ultimately it goes to the Assemble for approval by resolution. So look for that by the end of this year. And right now we're operating again in our current one. The other function that this committee has taken on, just to kind of see how it goes, is meetings like this, meeting actively during session to give updates to folks, have an opportunity to speak about legislative matters. We've had some resolutions come through, in support of bills that people were able to share. And so we've had a monthly meeting during session. I will also say, I know we are busy, and I know there's other kind of avenues to stay involved in legislative issues. And so that is one thing to think about going forward is, should we continue to meet during session? We are not obligated to. This committee doesn't meet year round. We do stop meeting in the summer when there's not, obviously there's still things going on, but not during session. And in fact, I've been contemplating canceling our June meeting, which will be after session. We've done in the past a debrief on what happened. but especially given that we're in the interim, a lot of these things are really going to just be in progress. So that's one thought. So right now we have a meeting scheduled for June 12th. We may cancel that. So don't be surprised if you see a cancellation. And then in general, I think the question is how do we best use our time? And especially because we have such a strong presence in the mayor's office of taking lead on advocacy and lobbying. We certainly have the ability to do that. Members can do that without any restriction through your assembly capacity. But that's also kind of we're in a different place than we were a couple of years ago. So all of that to say, that's really how this committee has operated. In addition to, like I said, the core function that's always been there. But it is open for discussion. So as we move into our discussion about committees in our next committee, that is something to think about. And I will also put out there, we are discussing new leadership for committees potentially. And so I have been chair of the legislative committee the last 2 years. I am happy to step back. I have my vice chair, Mr. Johnson, who has been involved as well. Mr. Constant was also vice chair when I first started. So it's just something to think about too, that I think this committee is flexible. And it is something that if somebody wants to take on more leadership, it can be a number of different things. So all that to say, I'll see if there's any additional comments, questions about this committee, thoughts for the future, interest, disinterest.
If they adjourn and don't move into a special session, I would be in favor of canceling next month's meeting.
Thank you. Yes, that's a good point. And of course, we'll have our joint meeting so we can get an update on school funding regardless. Okay, any other comments, questions? Okay, I don't see any right now, so we will be adjourned from this committee. Oh, and let's see, audience, I always forget to do audience participation, but I'm looking at a room with empty chairs, so, and no one on the phone. So I will assume there is no one to participate. And so with that, we will adjourn, and then we will be back here at 1 p.m. for the Rules Committee meeting. Thank you.